All right, does that work? Yeah. Thanks a lot for joining us in person today. We'll go live, Zoom will go live in 1 or 2 minutes. So we'll start at 14:01 to give people time to connect a bit. So I'll just do a quick introduction of the agenda, and then we'll start with the presentation by the academics, and then we'll move to a panel discussion. But I'll repeat that again in 30 seconds. Are you going to re-listen to me now? Thanks a lot for joining us in person today. We'll go live. Awkward. All right, we can get started now. Thanks for joining us. Thanks to those who are here in person with us today, and to those who are joining us online, whether you're speakers or part of the audience. So today's presentation will be on the European wholesale electricity market from crisis to net zero, which is the title of our last report that was published just this morning. So if you can move on to the next slide, please. I'll just start by giving everyone a quick overview of the agenda. So we'll start with a 30-minute presentation of the main findings of the report by our academic team, which will then be followed by a panel discussion with SER members, regulators and corporates, and a Q&A session with the audience. We'll then break for coffee for 15 minutes, and we'll come back for a roundtable discussion on select key issues, mostly focused on potential long-term adjustments to market design. And yeah, so just to start, next slide, please. And next. So starting with the paper presentation, so the paper was written by SER academics Michael Pollitt from the University of Cambridge, Niels-Henrik van der Veer from the University of Oslo, Catherine Banet, also from the University of Oslo, and Bert Willems from Tilburg University. So I'll let them present the report, starting from the introduction with Niels-Henrik. Niels-Henrik, please, next slide.
Thank you very much. It's been a real privilege, extremely interesting to participate in the work of on this report. I guess for those of you who are decision makers, who work in the industry, it's more than interesting. But it's also been a challenge because events have been unfolding as we speak and as we've been writing. So we've tried to get the balance right between, on the one hand, picking up what's been happening, trying to understand what's going on right now, but at the same time, having a long-term vision. Our aim in this report is not to solve or come up with proposals for how the current crisis can be solved, although we have something to contribute on that, we think. Our aim has been to think carefully through how the current events might provide information, provide insight into how well the electricity market is actually working, and whether the current design is fit for the future, for the longer term, for Europe's net zero ambitions. It's of course, important to point out that the markets have been doing essentially what we expect them to do. In particular, prices have gone up to signal scarcity. That has had the effect of creating profits for some. For others, they've been exposed to very high prices. And for some customers, it's been very difficult or even important to pay. So there's strong distributional impacts, and perhaps the main concern right now during the crisis is how to handle that distribution impact of high prices on households and industry. And that has wider implications for the competitiveness of many European industries. However, as I said, this is not our main aim. What we're doing, we're starting from a lot of those proposals that have been put forward by a number of different countries, by a number of different stakeholders, by the European Commission, on how to deal with the current crisis. And in particular, we've been considering how well or whether they would improve the market is working in the longer term. Next, please. We start out by providing a short history lesson, explaining why the current market design looks as it does, because obviously there's been careful thinking and it's been evolving over 20 years or more. So there's no accident, the market design that we have today. It's built on some very fundamental principles, in particular, and very importantly, which was somewhat new when it happened, the separation of monopolistic and competitive activities. On the one hand, the networks, the infrastructure, where we cannot rely on competition. On the other hand, generation and supply, where competition is, at least in principle, possible. To a large extent, we have moved away from vertically integrated utilities to a market design that's based on decentralized decisions, where generators make their own decisions about how much they want to produce, how much they want to invest. Consumers make decisions about how much they want to consume, and so on and so forth. In fact, many of the marketplaces have been designed by the market participants themselves rather than being regulated. And these marketplaces are where market participants meet and trade and ensure that there's a balance between what people want to sell and what people want to buy. And of course, importantly and gradually, markets have been integrated across Europe, trying to realize the more general idea of the internal European market also for electricity and gas. So the intention of this market design, and to a large extent that has been also the result, is that by balancing demand and supply, we will on the one hand ensure that there isn't any shortages, and there hasn't been, even in the current crisis, that resources are used efficiently, in particular that generators are being dispatched in according to cost efficiency. And we also have supply security, also in the sense that a wider European market is more resilient to shocks. Of course, this also means that a shock in a particular part of the market will be transmitted to the rest of Europe, but it does have the effect that a shock in a given country or a given region will have smaller effects overall. I now cannot see the slide. Thank you. An important question, particularly in the longer term, is whether markets are giving the right signals for investment. And that is in particular related to the extent that investors are able to hedge the risk, because risk there will be. We have seen prices fluctuating not only during the current crisis, but also before, and there is great uncertainty about what sort of level prices will be at in the future. So hedging is important. And the question then is the current market design delivering sufficient hedging opportunities for investors? Next slide, please. We spent some time on this in the report. We will return to it later today. Here is just a slide. You see a little figure there, which I won't try to explain, but we're trying to make the point or remind the readers that a well-functioning market, designed as the current market is, will in fact deliver investment signals, not only to ensure that total generation capacity is sufficient, but also that we have the right mix of different technologies. Admittedly, that's under ideal conditions, but nevertheless, it's important to keep in mind that the market does do a job of providing price signals. Now, in later years, of course, a lot of the investment that has taken place has not been market-based in a narrow sense of the word, but has rather been the result of government intervention, because we want more renewables, we want more green investment, and governments around Europe have, through various means, attempted to ensure that there is new renewable investment coming online. Of course, that has tended to drive prices down, and currently, I mean, in this current extreme situation, of course, any investment would be profitable if those prices were to last. But before that, and when prices come down again, they're probably going to be too low to support market-based investment without any government help. So we would expect, given the goals that we have for renewables and green investment, that governments will still continue to support such investments. In the longer term, however, when renewable generation becomes dominant, we will expect that to a larger extent investment will be market-based. And then the question is, does the market provide the right sort of hedging opportunities, the right types of long-term contracts to ensure that those investments we want will be forthcoming? Thank you. So I give the word to Michael.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Nils-Henrik. And I'll just also say what a pleasure it's been to work on this report with my SARE colleagues and with SARE sponsors who've been generous with their input. The next slide will show what I'm going to talk about. So in part 2 of the report, we review some of the suggested interventions in the wholesale market, those put forward by the Agency for Cooperation of European Energy Regulators, some proposals, as you can see, from Great Britain, Spain, Greece, and some of the latest proposals from the Commission itself. These are a mixture of proposals that focus on the longer term in the light of the crisis and short-term proposals. I'll mention the Acer document from April a bit later. Great Britain has published an extensive document consulting on all aspects of the long-term design of the electricity market. Review of electricity market arrangements, it's called. Spain came up with an early proposal to cap the price of gas for electricity in an attempt to influence the marginal price in the wholesale energy market. Greece came up with a 2-market solution for on-demand energy versus as available energy, looking to create 2 prices for short-run electricity and capture potentially a lower price for renewable output. And the Commission has made its own proposals at a high level for what should happen in the energy market in response to the crisis. One of the suggestions that's often made is that government should sign longer term contracts on behalf of customers, particularly with low carbon generators. Whether that's an efficient way to reduce costs, of course, partly depends on the implicit interest rate. If those are entirely voluntary contracts, as we point out, that effectively it borrows money from private companies and gives it to customers, and it may be more efficient just to do it through the tax system to do something like that. We discuss a number of these 2 market solutions where suggestions that the market should be split into a lower price market, which only consists of low carbon generators, and a higher price market where all the fossil fuel generators would be. There are various versions of that. The Greek one is a short run market split, signing long-term contracts to reduce the long-term price and give a lower price for low carbon generators with long-term PPAs, would effectively be another type of two market solution, but it would have rather different potential short run effects. We point out that a short run two market solution, such as the one suggested by the Greek delegation, doesn't make a lot of sense, because the marginal cost of low carbon output can be very high if you're trying to get more output out of a nuclear power plant in real time by running it hot, or if you're trying to overcome constraints in the networks when you've got renewable generation. The marginal cost of extra generation can easily be the same as fossil fuel generation. And that's not to mention a low carbon technology like biomass, where the price of the biomass input is of course linked to fossil fuel prices. So you wouldn't necessarily expect that type of low carbon generation to be lower priced than gas-fired generation. Next slide, please. Previous slide, slide 9, thank you. So on the previous slide, thank you, some of the points that we make is that I think initially many economists, for instance myself, would have overlooked the macroeconomic aspects of the crisis. We thought about this in terms of just being an energy problem. It's clear that energy prices do contribute to general inflation quite significantly, and also they raise very significant distributional consequences which need to be addressed at the macroeconomic level. So this isn't just a crisis of market design. The other thing is that the high prices that we're observing are clearly well outside the normal range of fluctuation of prices, and that both the magnitude of the price rise and the amount of time for which it has been sustained is extremely historically unusual. And that would suggest that rationing of energy makes a lot of sense. If the fundamental problem is a shortage of gas, then rationing the use of gas would seem to be sensible in historical terms. And indeed, as we point out, we're in aspects of a war economy. In war economies, you suspend the normal operation of the market. You do ration critical goods and services, and you take steps to limit profits that firms might be making. And indeed, one of the things that we need to do is suggest interventions which are strictly time limited, and where there's proper cost-benefit analysis of the interventions. And we do suggest a role for regulators in making sure that they're tracking the money flows into the energy sector, in particular into electricity and gas sectors that they're regulating, and keeping an eye on who is actually benefiting from high prices. Next slide, please. So it's just as, as an example of the sort of detail that we go into, we discussed this ACER report from April. This is a very interesting report. It makes it all sorts of suggestions for future-proofing the wholesale electricity market. Some of these are things that the Commission and ACER have been working on for a long time, and they're sensible at any time. So, better use of locational signals. That was a sensible design prior to the crisis. And indeed, some of the aspects of what makes for a sensible support regime around renewables, such as long-term auctioned PPAs, that's also a fairly sensible long-term design change. And one could go further. I mean, one of these future-proofing suggestions is that we want to improve the efficiency of investment in renewables across Europe. For many years ago, we used to worry about, well, can't we create a single market in renewable support so that German customers are actually supporting more solar in the south of Spain and Italian customers are supporting wind in the North Sea, rather than the other way around. We do want to keep open to ideas which would genuinely massively reduce the cost of rolling out more renewables across Europe. And I'll hand over to Bert.
Okay, thanks, Michael. So I would also like to thank my colleagues and also the sponsors, because this has been quite interesting and it has been a bit of a moving target. So as we have been working, we always got new ideas and new policy proposals. So the next part of the paper, we're going to start from two challenges. That's the energy crisis and net zero. And we are trying to look at, next slide, sorry. And we're trying to look at what kind of lessons we can take from empirical research or from economic theory with respect to market design. So this part is a more conceptual section. And here in the presentation, I'm going to be more forward-looking, looking at lessons for the future and less speak about the energy crisis. So what are some of the lessons that we can take? So the first one is that if you look at empirical evidence, then we see that spot market outcomes in electricity markets are mainly determined by market fundamentals. So that means like what kind of technologies do you have in the market? And the demand side, how big is the demand? And by market structure. And with market structure, we mean horizontal market structure, how many firms are competing, but also vertical market structure. What are the amount of long-term contracts and what's the amount of vertical integration in the market? So if you correct for those things, you can actually explain the outcome of the market. And the design of the market, whether you have a pay-as-bid auction or uniform price auction, does not matter so much. Second lesson is that policies that try to create different short-term prices for the same product is going to increase the system cost. So this means that the generation mix might not be optimal, or the consumption levels might not be optimal, or you might be using the wrong generation technology in the short run. And consumers will have to pay for that. So basically, introducing this hybrid setting or moving from a uniform price auction to a pay-as-bid auction is going to create different prices for different producers, and this is not in the interest of consumers. A third point that we make is that renewable energy production depends on scarce natural resources, and some technologies are going to be cheaper than other technologies, and those efficient technologies are going to get some scarcity rents. And the government might want to extract those scarcity rents, but this does not require a change in market design. We can use profit taxes, for instance, to extract those rents, so that's also not a reason to change the market design. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we also looked at the effect of long-term contracts, and we first looked what kind of effects the net zero might have on the use of contracts. And we predict that the use of long-term contracts by private parties is going to increase. And the reason for that is that the government is no longer going to guarantee the risk. And we also expect more volatility in a net zero scenario. So there are more reasons for firms to hedge. But there are also good arguments for government intervention in this contracting market. The first one is that we want to regulate the risk of retailers. We have seen that retailers might take too much risk, so they might offer long-term contracts to consumers, but they do not hedge their position in the forward market. So that's a market failure, and we might want to regulate this risk. We also might want to standardize contracts to simplify netting between different parties and to increase transparency. And the third point is that we might want to hedge on behalf of consumers. So small consumers, they're not always completely rational. They might not hedge sufficiently themselves, and maybe the government has to be a bit more paternalistic and step in on behalf of consumers. But this does not mean that we still see an important role for private contracts between generators and large customers, and also for integrated utilities that are going to have a diversified portfolio and going to do the risk management within this integrated utility. So whether member states should provide long-term government-backed financial PPAs, there is no consensus about this among economists. So there's little empirical evidence that this is working. And we think that this should be left to the subsidiarity principle. So this should be up to the member state to decide whether they are going to be implementing this. But the European Commission should guarantee that the impact on the internal market is not too large. So the spot market signals that need to be there. There should not be state aid. So it should not be that by subsidizing those PPAs, you give state aid to energy intensive industries. And we also want to guarantee that there is cross-border participation in those long-term contracts. You cannot just say this is only for our national generators. Okay.
Thank you, Bert. If we go to next slide, please. Yes, so as well, I would like to thank colleagues and SIR team and sponsors for very stimulating discussions during the drafting of the report. And that was at the crossroad of law, economics, and political realities as well. So all that very much stimulating as well. The section 4 of the report relates to the legal aspects of wholesale electricity market design and possible redesign. And the purpose was to, on the one hand, having an analysis and stock take of what is the legal architecture of wholesale market design at EU level, but as well looking at what has been proposed at EU and member states level, and looking at the end at some of the proposals on the table in terms of reform. The first point is that when we look at this legal architecture, legislative architecture, it is now the result of a very comprehensive regulation at harmonized level, at the EU level, very detailed and technical in nature. But as well, we have seen, as has been mentioned by Nils Henrik, that there has been a tendency as well to have more decentralized movement towards more co-regulation as well. And that is reflected by the way of elaborating legislation with the involvement of different stakeholders and parties, will they be TSOs, NEMOs, as well as NRAs and ACER. That is important to take into account, because when you want to revise those rules, then you will need to follow certain strict procedures that will also involve those stakeholders. But at the same time, we're closer to the technical aspect and to the functioning of them. Another important starting point is to be aware of the legal basis for this harmonization. In terms of EU energy policy, after the Lisbon Treaty, Article 194 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union is the legal basis. And that's a shared competence between member states and the EU. During the past month, what we have seen is a shift towards adopting regulations for the matter of addressing short-term issues based on Article 122 of the TFEU. And this is a provision that is targeting solidarity between EU member states, and at the same time related to a situation of severe difficulties in the supply of certain products, and notably energy. Why is it important? And this is a remarkable shift, is because here that will be the Council, that means the member states that are in the driving seat. They will adopt the regulation on a proposal by the European Commission, but the Parliament doesn't have a word to say except if it's consulted. So that's an important shift as well in the type of proposals that can be discussed and adopted. There is as well a need to distinguish when we look at the different proposals that we review in the report between what should be a future-proof market design under net zero objectives and what are the medium to long-term constraints and the toolbox that can be applied at a more temporary level. So that's a central question that we raise in the report, and we need to distinguish those different measures and what can be adopted, but as well the consequences of short-term measures on long-term reform. Next, please. Here, this is a question of sequencing of market intervention, and the report makes a distinction between what should be short-term measures, mid-term measures, and long-term reforms. When we look at what has been proposed at the very beginning of what was before at the early start of the winter 2021-2022 an energy price crisis, we had short-term measures within the competences of the member states, and that was the purpose of the toolbox developed by the European Commission. And then we progressively moved along the winter to a crisis situation, which triggered the adoption of more mid-term measure. We knew that there was a risk, and we need to manage that risk. And therefore, new types of measures have been developed, notably on the basis of Article 122, as I mentioned, but they also was with the purpose of developing rationing plans at national level, and to develop as well possibly a common platform for the purchase of gas, LNG, and hydrogen. So we've seen the mix of measures to better plan in the mid-term the adoption of national and EU measures. And finally, we have the broader question of the long-term reform, and that's a discussion that has started but absolutely not ended. And we do have here some elements that we stress in the report in terms of what could be those market reform. But when we look at the short-term intervention, an important point that we make is that they should not jeopardize the functioning of the internal energy market. They could have some important consequences on notably the fragmentation of the energy market, of national solutions, of proposals to restrict trade, while we have a need for actually more cooperation, more solidarity, and complementarity between the energy systems. In terms of the long-term perspective, market reform, two elements can be identified, two tracks. The first one related to price formation and regulation around it. We still are in the phase of implementing much of the proposals from the third and the clean energy package for all Europeans, for example, balancing platforms, etc. And here, if we interact with those processes, we're changing as well a bit of the rules of the game, but we see that at least from what the European Commission has proposed in the Repower EU plan, there is a desire to continue in the track of having more transparency on the markets, notably on that element, but we could also add maybe some elements that we have been implementing on the short term. The second track relates to market behavior, where we see as well plans as to reinforcing investments, not only coming from the market, as Bert has mentioned, but as well more interventionist way of pursuing investments. Would it be in terms of government-backed PPAs that could be discussed? Legally could be also challenging in terms of EU harmonization approach to it, while we have already corporate PPAs that are enabled by legislation, but we do also have a set of other proposals put in order to further foster investment in renewable energy and demand response and flexibility, such as contracts for difference and others. So, for example, when we look at would it be PPAs or contract for difference, we will have a discussion under EU harmonization approach, what can be achieved at the EU level, what is required at the EU level to preserve internal market, or what can be approved at national level under notably stated rules in case of public support. Thank you. Next.
Thanks, Katrine. Okay, I'll just offer some concluding thoughts from the last part of the report as we move on to the next slide. Just to say that this is an 88-page report, and I do commend it to you to look at a lot of the detail that's in the report. It's a companion report to the report that we published in July on retail markets, and we're also looking to publish an integrated report later in the year, which brings together both of these reports and updates them. And obviously, we're very interested in people's comments for that final report. So here's just a few thoughts, and they're only interim thoughts. As Katrine has been saying, and I think as Niels Hendrik was also saying, we don't want to do anything that undermines the short-run efficiency of the electricity market, which has taken years to bring to a genuine single market. The Commission needs to be policing national interventions to make sure they aren't undermining the integrity of the efficiency of the short-run electricity market. The fundamental problem that we face is one of a shortage of gas, and we must reduce the demand for gas or improve the supplies of gas. That remains the focus. Changing the market design for the electricity market is not going to address that fundamental problem, and it's the fundamental problem that needs to be addressed. As we've noted, there's a lot of discussion in the report about long-term PPAs, and I think it's important to say that PPAs are a bet on the future, and they're also a bet on the nature of discount rates. And different countries will have different preferences about their appetite for betting on the future, and they'll also have different interest rates that they're exposed to. And as we point out in the report, historic vertically integrated utilities did effectively sign long-term PPAs on the capital that they invested in. And over time, that resulted in very high cost energy systems in Europe in many countries. So, they're not a one-way bet, even though they look like a good bet at the moment. Next slide, please. Other things that are worth pointing out is that suggestions around voluntary renegotiation of contracts and switching merchant renewable contracts out into long-term PPAs, that doesn't necessarily reduce the net present value of the payments that consumers are committed to. And again, one needs to think carefully about what one is trying to do in doing that, and whether there are not cheaper ways of achieving the same thing for customers and for society. Looking closely at the way price caps have been implemented and their relationship to the wholesale market would seem to be important. The very recent German proposal for how to cap the price of household gas in Germany this winter is very interesting, because it does maintain the marginal cost of gas as being being determined in the wholesale market. And so rising block tariffs, where the final block of the tariff for most consumers exposes them to the underlying wholesale prices, would seem to be very important, while still trying to cap the total bill that consumers pay. And there are still some distortionary taxes around in the energy system, and the extent to which these still exist, they need to be removed, like the carbon price floor in the UK, which adds a further carbon price to fossil fuel generation. And it's important, as Catherine was pointing out, to think about different time frames. You know, in the end, there's a lot of different proposals out there. Some of them relate to the crisis and some of them relate to long-term market design. Many of those that relate to long-term market design, such as the implementation of nodal prices, may be sensible in the long run, but they won't do a lot for the crisis in the short run. And they'll be very disruptive in the short run. So one needs to be careful to distinguish the different timeframes under which different proposals for changing the market design will actually have a significant effect. And these are things that we point out in the report. So thank you for listening, and thank you again to all my colleagues and stakeholders for their participation in the report. Back to you, Albrecht.
Thank you very much, everyone. So if we can move to the next slide, then so thank you very much for a great presentation. I'm sure everybody's got loads of questions, but first we're gonna have a panel. Don't hesitate if you're online to drop your questions in the Q&A section, or even to raise your hand, and we can give you the floor afterwards. If you're in the room, just raise your hand and we'll give you the floor after the panel. It's a crowded panel, so that's 7 people. I think 2 of them online and the rest in the room. So we've got Verdiana Ambrosi from Terna, Klaus Hammes from EI, the Swedish energy regulator, Andrea Villa from Enel, Inger Kristin Holm from Norsk Hydro, Christian Goulart McNerney from Ofgem, Alan Takun from EDF, and Christina Papapostolou from PPC. So I'll give everyone an opportunity to react to the presentation and to maybe elaborate on specific points that you think are important. And maybe I'll start, maybe I'll just take it alphabetically for the initial comments, and so by organization name. So maybe we can start with you, Klaus, on your initial reaction to the report. So catching you off guard a bit.
Okay,
thank you.
A little bit, but not too much off guard, actually. And the most important thing, I think, is it's a very important and relevant report that you've been reading here. And I think this really high quality and is overall very useful to us as a regulator, and has been already useful and will be supporting us in our internal work on developing our thought about the electricity markets design and where we want to go and where the problems are. So I think that it's really great in itself. I think also I want to commend you that you managed to include the most recent proposals on Greece and Spain and the EU proposals in the report, and give an analysis of those, even though you're maybe a little bit too nice to the EU commissions when we see that the proposals don't really have any impact assessments or anything else, and we had to do it all ourselves. That is not too easy because things are quite complex. You want to understand them all, how things interact, especially the proposed cap and so on, and strategic behavior connected to that one. But nevertheless, that was really valuable that you could include those things, including Acer, of course. What I also really liked about the report was the first chapter that really established clear principles. What are we talking about when we're looking into the electricity market? We have the parts of the electricity markets and the separation of the regulated part, more or less, and the market-based part, as you would call it, or whatever you want to call it. But also they had intraday marginal pricing and so on. It's quite important, even though it's for those people that are within the sector, it's everyday business, but you cannot state it too often, because marginal pricing itself is too often questioned nowadays, but it's something that simply occurs. And here also maybe a reference to Leon Hertz, that has done a lot of work recently, also on LinkedIn, whatever, proposed clarifying what is meant, and why we have marginal pricing is really good. And I also liked, and it's also very valuable to have that chapter 4 on the legal. All the chapters are important, but also the legal stuff is really important, and also to separate the separation of the future-proof long-term market and on the net zero objectives versus what we're looking at currently at all the temporary measures. Yeah, that is also very important. And what we have seen so far, also in something that should probably be will in the future, probably, but maybe about others develop much further. But the interaction of the macroeconomic, and the energy markets, that is really interesting for an economist in some way, but maybe not so much for a regulator. But I think that could warrant much more work. Then we not always really clear when I read the report on what you really think about PPAs. At times you see it looks like PPAs, okay, they might be done on a free market. On other sectors, you see it as part of a larger government intervention, where the government even should buy cheap electricity from renewable producers via PPAs to protect or to hedge for customers. I'm not really clear on that, but maybe I have to read it a couple of more times to understand really. But I think that could be more clarified, as well as the concept of, you seem to think that in the net zero environment in the future, you will have to have a special taxation in the end of renewable producers. I'm not really sure why that would need to be automatically so. And then also back to the PPAs, I mean, what I don't understand is when you have a PPA, how you there will also be some kind of market separation. And when you look into the net zero future, there will only be net zero production. So I'm not really sure how that market design would look like. That would be interesting to see that even more. And I could continue quite a lot, but I think we should give the word to the next speaker.
Thanks a lot, Klaus. Yeah, and we can continue the conversation on PPAs and more and other long-term changes a bit later. I'm sure everybody's got different opinions on this one. And actually, maybe I can ask someone online, maybe. So go to Enel, maybe Andrea. I don't know if you want to take, if you're ready to take the floor. Can we hear you?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Hello. Yes. Hello. Floor is yours.
So thank you very much. Thank you very much for the report. I would like to start maybe from one point. First of all, that when we discuss about the market design, we should never forget that what we have to save is the internal energy market. So what it's really at stake, it's the internal energy market, and the market design is an instrument on the internal energy market. We should not try to save the market design that we have, because it's the market design that we have. We have to save the internal energy market. And the second point is that there is no market design that is technology neutral. No market design is technology neutral, even if it's written inside our regulation and directive, because the market design that we have right now, it was designed in 2005 for a particular need that we have in that moment, for a particular technology and for a particular way of seeing the world. In that moment, we had to invest in CCGT. We have to integrate national electricity market. And so we designed a market design that it was based on CCGT and did not start from the retail market. It started from the wholesale market, and it says, okay, and after a while, retail market will be liberalized following this, and let's hope that everything will be fine. 20 years later, we have different things that have changed. We try to save the internal energy market with different intervention. The internal energy market that we have thought in 2005 is not the internal energy market that we have right now, because we had a lot of externalities. For example, we didn't think about renewables. We tried to introduce VTS in 2005. We tried to introduce capacity market in the last 10 years. And so we have different add-ons to this internal and the internal market design that we have in mind in 2005. We are trying to save it. And now we have another externality that is called Putin, that it was not taken into consideration. The internal energy market that we have designed, it has been a market design that increase our dependency of Russian gas. And it's something like that it was not taken into consideration when we design it. And now we are in front of a different geopolitical world. And so we have to ask ourselves, is market design still correct? And I think when we when we pose this question, we have to consider that the retail market has totally changed. When we start in 2005, we have passive customers. Now we have in front of us customers that are very, very active, that are becoming more active, and they will become more active because a lot of them, they will become prosumers after this new oil shock of the 2020, or the gas shock of the 2022. So I think it's time that we don't revolutionize our energy market, but that we evolve our energy market. We don't have to throw away things that works, because we have a lot of things that are working really good. We have been able to integrate the day-ahead market. Now we have a single Eufemia algorithm that is able to couple markets from Portugal till Finland with only one algorithm. We have the possibility. We have been very, very good at this. So we have to save the day-ahead market. We have to save the balancing market. We have to save the process of integration that we have been able to do in the last 20 years. And it was very, very hard fighting on each article on how to create a really integrated market. But we have to update it to take into consideration that the retail market customers have changed. They want something different, and the technology changed. Both of them, the new technology, renewables, and customers want stable and low prices, both the customers and the new technology. And I think that the market design should be designed around this. So it should be designed, first of all, starting from the long-term contract. The solution is not only to improve marginally the PPA through a small modification of the renewable energy directive. Because if we ask ourselves what will be the dimension of the 2030 of the PPA's market, it will be not huge. The industrial customers does not represent 90% of the electricity consumption in our countries. They represent 30, 40, 20% of the electricity consumption. If we want really to move toward a long-term contractualization in our market design, we have to make a step forward. And so we have to allow the member state to introduce other form of long-term contractualization, for example, obligation on retailer, final customers, reduction of cost of counterparty risk for PPAs. We have different ways to go ahead. And so I think we should try to innovate our market design, trying to go in this direction, pushing forward the long-term contract. But when we move in different speed with a country that goes in one direction and in another direction, we should also ask ourselves that maybe there will be some country that will have the benefit of long-term contracts without paying the cost of this long-term contractualization, because all the time that we sign a contract, we take some risk. Like we take some risk staying in a short-term energy contract. So I think that we should try to understand how these two different model countries that want to stay in a fully short-term energy market can cooperate and exist with also countries that want to move toward more a long-term contract view energy market. And I think it will be a challenge because we will have to find a way to cooperate and go forward and share the benefit of both worlds, because short-term energy market has brought benefit in the last 20 years for our customer, but also brought some risk that we didn't take care in the last 20 years, and now we are paying the consequences. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Andrea. Interesting points on the balance between short and long term, and also the connection between wholesale and retail markets. I think that's also you've got a line that's in common with EDF, I believe, Alain. If I can put you on the spot for your intervention.
Okay. Thank you very much, Albert. So I will not repeat what Andrea said. Frankly speaking, I think I could have done about the same speech. So I will add some different elements. First, I would like to thank SER to have been the first think tanks before the crisis to go on this question of market design. It has been visionary. And we today have a report, first on retail in July and now on wholesale. And Michael announced that there would be a third one linking the two. So you are really, I think, doing your job, I think, thanks here. So thank you also to the academic team for the work has been done, the exchanges we could have with you, which have been very interesting. And I think for us too, and I hope for you too, but for us it has been very useful. And now if I could like some messages looking at your recommendations and reading at the report itself, maybe in the short term, I understand that you defend, the market design, getting against any market interventions. We agree, we should avoid that. But we are facing a momentum where an externality, the gas price due to the war in Ukraine, is damaging the prices for the end consumer. It does not damage the market design per se. The market design per se is working well, but we have to do something against this externality. Okay, if I go now to the short-term market design, as you said, we fully agree with you, it has to be maintained. We are in a risk today that politicians may attack what has been taken more than 20 years to be built. And the short-term market design we have today is an optimal dispatch of all the generation we have in an interconnected European network. It's a treasury of what has been done within the energy market for 30 years. We have to keep it absolutely. That's key. If I go to the question of long terms, maybe I have some regrets regarding perhaps what you said, because if I was late, because I left, a conference where I could hear Katarina Sikovmani from the Commission. She used the term long-term contracts every 30 seconds. So with NL, we agree on long-term contracts, and I got just a mail, giving me the feeling that the whole electric industry should be largely aligned on the fact that long-term contracts should be back. And maybe you can tell me, what about consumer in that? We are not doing long-term contract for generators. We are doing that for consumers, because we have to keep in mind that what is key in the market is the final consumer and is the energy transition toward decarbonation, in which electricity will play a major role in the future. And if we do believe that if we want to give stable prices to end consumers, I mean, for domestic customers and for industrial, just keep in mind that for industrial, and we could, we had exchanges with some association a few days ago, some of them are thinking of moving their production from Europe to the USA simply because the price is low and stable. Today, we are not facing demand reduction, but demand destruction. This is what we have to be very careful in the coming times. That's why we need a reform in which companies can be sure to have a visibility on the price which they offer to them for their own long-term business plan. And that can be offered by long-term contracts. And long-term contracts, what we have to do in long-term contracts, is to be sure that we can, on one hand, develop the low carbon means we need for the future, which is solar, wind, hydro, and nuclear. We also need to have, on the downstream side, we need to have storage, we need to have demand response, including all these processes. And the long-term contracts must be there to share the risk of investments between the whole market actors that are shareholders, banks, generation companies, customers, suppliers. So, and by sharing this risk and dispersing among the economy, we are able to reduce the price and to reduce its volatility on that. That's why, you know, we think, you know, maybe if you make the link in your last report between retail and wholesale, it should be very important for our point of view to see what means long-term contracts for end consumers. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Thank you very much, Alain. I'm going to try and move so we can, because we still have 4 speakers and I don't want everybody to be short-handed. Inger Christine from Norskidro, do you want to take the floor next? Yes, please.
Okay. Yes, first, thank you for a very good report and presentations. I think it's important contributions to these discussions we will have and will have in the future on more structural changes to the market design. And I think you demonstrate very well the benefits of the current market mechanisms. So yes, I represent a big industrial consumer where power is more than 1/3 of our operating costs. So, and we need affordable prices at the level of our competitors globally, including tariffs, taxes, and charges also. And we need long-term predictability. We need long-term PPAs. I share your view that it's not the market design that has caused the high prices. It's the fundamentals. And that's what we need to improve. That's at least something we really try to stress. We are in a very special situation now that need temporary emergency measures, as you also try to distinguish short-term, medium-term, long-term. I think that's a very good approach. But we need emergency measures to avoid that industry leave Europe permanently. But these measures should not intervene in the market mechanisms. That's our view. They should be more as state aid types of measures, more targeted. But we like measures that kind of have voluntary saving of energy, and they should also be kind of market-based, but separate markets, preferably. But now we're discussing more long-term measures, and what we think we need a more robust power system. And we very much support that the spot market is at core of the market design. Still, I'm not sure if it will be in the future with more decentralized markets and intraday trade and so on, but it's still very important for resource allocation and as a reference for hedging. We don't see any alternatives to marginal pricing in the spot market. All other alternatives we have considered, they will have less efficiency and increase system costs over time. So that's definitely. And we think it's a lot of good works going on among TSOs and exchanges to develop markets to fit for future with more renewables, locational signals, and so on. But we need a lot more investments in generation capacity and infrastructure, and we need it at a lot faster pace. And the market cannot alone deliver sufficient investment signals, which I also understand you are trying to say. And it doesn't give enough predictability to investors. So, and also, as you mentioned, that the investors face a lot of constraints. So what we really need from our perspective is to speed up the permitting processes for renewables that's, yeah, if we should phase out fossil and decarbonize the power system, we need to speed up this process. We need a better balance between supply and demand if the market mechanisms should work appropriately. That's our view. There might be also need for financial support to ensure enough investment and also de-risking mechanisms. But and we also think that the capacity mechanisms will probably be an element in the market design going forward. It also is already to some extent. But what is important for us is that such support schemes does not impact the possibilities for commercial PPAs negatively. So generators must still have incentives to enter into long-term PPAs with industrial consumer. We need well-functioning PPA markets. So I think that's more or less what I have to say.
Thanks very much, Inga Kristin. I think I will definitely continue the discussion on PPAs after that, and I think probably some members of the academic team will probably react to some of the things that have been said. But we'll finish the panel first. So we'll go next to the UK. Chris, maybe you want to give us Ofgem's perspective on this. That'd be quite interesting. Thank you.
I think sounds good. Like I said, first of all, thanks very much to the academic team and the SET team and other members. It's been a very valuable and well-developed debate. As Alon said as well, brilliant that SET introduced these questions of longer-term market design sort of very early on in this crisis. I think it allowed all of us to develop our thinking in this area. I guess get a little bit ahead of the curve, which has been very helpful. And yeah, we very much appreciate the opportunity to hear from all of you and to share our own insights as well. And yeah, I mean, this is a very critical time for our sector. Obviously, exploring the issues that we're exploring here today and other workshops has at the moment become politically imperative. Also means it's slightly more difficult to have a purely technocratic discussion, but equally makes it much more interesting, much more fascinating, at least, if one is a politics nerd. And yeah, very, very interesting report. Great that it's, I guess, separates the measures to tackle the crisis sort of in the short term from larger, longer term questions around market design, rightly so, in our opinion. Because obviously, on the one hand, we're seeing the distributional impact of this crisis. They are obviously not good, and we need well thought out emergency interventions here. But in terms of our response to longer term market design questions, any reforms, if they are judged to be a good idea, need to be very carefully considered and, as it were, not implemented in the heat of the moment. So the work should be done in a much more considered way. So very much agree with the framing of those questions in the paper. And I guess given the importance of the questions of some work we've got going on at the moment in Ofgem, so our energy ministry is currently leading a sort of very comprehensive review of electricity market arrangements, looking in the sort of more considered slow way at longer term reforms, properly thinking about it. And Ofgem's job in this is essentially a very detailed look at locational pricing, potentially zonal pricing, potentially nodal pricing. We've been engaging quite a lot with industry, system operators, other regulators from the continent as well. And I mean, it's an interesting piece of work. We think that having more granular locational signals for pricing, it's our leading hypothesis and could be quite helpful in terms of introducing more efficient demand and supply behaviors, giving better price signals to industry participants. But the work is still ongoing. So the consultation that our ministry kind of put out ended yesterday. So beginning of the new year, they'll probably be publishing a summary of responses, etc. We're still doing the work on this. So essentially anybody in this room, anybody watching this event remotely as well, if you want to just get in touch with Ofgem, I can definitely coordinate a meeting with the team that does that work, because we're always ready to hear insights from others, and also we're very happy to share our thinking and where it is at this stage. So yeah, thanks very much.
Thanks a lot, Chris. We'll take you up your word, but interesting to see that it's going on in the UK in the same time as ongoing reviews at EU level. Christina, do you want to
Yes,
give us
thank you.
PPC's perspective next?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, respected audience and honored members. I'm Christina Papapostolou from PPC. I would like, first of all, to thank especially the academic team for the work that they have done so far, as we consider them as the lighthouse of knowledge in such an important issue. And of course, her team, because it's very important what they did, they brought to the table to discuss different stakeholders like academia, national authorities, and cross-sectoral industry, and to discuss this very important topic. And when we're talking about a short and long-term market function, we all understand that there is no doubt today that suppliers, consumers face an unprecedented situation with energy prices skyrocketing. And that raises concerns about whether the current market functions and serves its purpose. However, this current energy crisis, while it's a major challenge, it is a chance. It is a chance to make a market stress test, let's say, and also to examine the potential improvements and enhancements that will allow it to exploit certain tools that maybe in the past were considered to be limitations. So regarding the findings of the study, we welcomed from the very beginning the two-dimension approach to the report, and that the one on the short term we need to see and tackle the current situation, which is an emergency, clearly an emergency, while at the same time understand what is the best way to move forward and deliver the long-term net zero targets. And as mentioned before, we need to make sure that we will not scrap the European power markets that have been developed, have made enormous effort for the last 2 decades to develop this market. But at the same time, we believe that we need to recognize the changes in the requirement and the enhancements required to make sure that the market delivers what is designed for. It is obvious that additional tools are needed for the energy transition, and we need to create a safe regulatory environment, ensuring proper market signals in order to allow green investments. And when we're talking about proper market signals, that already been mentioned, we need to provide affordable energy through the acceleration uptaking of the renewables. And one approach to that is to set ambitious targets that are already set. But also we have to be focusing in addressing current regulatory and administrative handles related to permitting. So one major factor is to ensure that all barriers will be removed in favor of full assessment of different market players in the forward market. And also to ensure that there will be no limitations to the long-term contracts suppliers and consumers have in place. One way to achieve that is by mandating that all PPCs will be disclosed and tradable, so it will be flexible. And in this context, best practices, PPAs practices that at the EU level proposed from regulatory authorities and system operators will give the appropriate signal to member states to establish a regulatory framework, both in terms of energy and financial perspective, and to support the energy industries, business and market participants. And this should be set in a transparent and harmonized way. Also, the role of the states is very important in the hedging process. Also, it was mentioned before. Some more elements that we would add in this, would like to contribute this discussion is the proper price formation in each market, because we need to make sure that the price signal in each market reflects the needs of the market. Flexibility is another key element. The role of well-functioning, harmonized, balanced market is important for the actual cost of balancing to be exposed to market participants, in order to make sure that the price signal reflects the needs of the market. and balancing plays a critical role in enabling the participation of new technologies in the market, such as demand response and storage. Government also support measures are needed to what we call now the phase 2 of the decarbonization, as technologies, as green hydrogen, for example, that are currently in early stages. We saw in this study that also the Greek proposal was taken into consideration. It is okay with regards with the market design proposal submitted in July. It is an interesting proposal, and it comes as an alternative voice trying to address the market challenges we currently face. However, some of the key areas of the proposal should be carefully considered as they raise issues in the short run, and also may lead to inefficiencies in the market function. But this is a very, we're discussing all this while being in a very, all the proposals on the table at a very dynamic stage. We try to understand together with other proposals currently discussed, and we need to follow the developments of the final outcome of this. So this is from our side as some first remarks, and we'll be happy to discuss further. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Christina. Oops, sorry. Yeah, rightly emphasizing there's obviously a lot of different aspects to this, some of them not purely market design related when you speak about permitting. Yeah, I think we may come back during the second session of the idea, the Greek idea. I mean, the two market idea is something that we also may have the opportunity to discuss a bit later, because it's not also not a new idea. And last but not least for our panel, so we've got Verdiana from Terna. Can you hear us, see us? Can we hear you?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Alberic. And many thanks to the whole academic team for the presentation and for drafting the report presented today. The discussion on the electricity market design has gained momentum with the current energy crisis. And before we started to observe the energy prices increase, we were instead all focused on how to deal with the energy transition. So in the respect and notwithstanding the need to address the current energy crisis, because we cannot, of course, ignore the dramatic macroeconomic effect it has, it is important, in my view, to keep paying attention on how to facilitate the energy transition. So basically, energy transition is not just a matter of climate change and environmental policies, but it is also an answer to the energy price soaring and to our energy dependency. Of course, the energy transition can be achieved by means of measures which show their effect more on medium and long-term time frame, while the crisis urges action with more immediate effect. And I would like to underline how the SER report has the merit of considering both these two important dimensions. In this respect, let me highlight a few aspects that I consider crucial in this discussion. First of all, amongst all the government and political intervention mentioned in the European toolbox, and amongst all the short-term and temporary measures which are being currently discussed in this week with the aim to be commonly applied at EU level, one crucial aspect from my perspective is the need to put effort in reducing energy consumption. Indeed, energy consumption reduction may contribute to the current crisis, and in particular gas consumption, let me say, because it would have effect on the market fundamentals, has already been mentioned by others, colleagues, from which market outcome depends. At the same time, when talking about reducing electricity consumption, I believe that notwithstanding the need to promote energy savings and the need to incentivize flexibility and demand response, we shall also consider the contribution that electrification can give in terms of efficiency, decarbonization, and energy independence due to the intrinsic efficiency of the electric vector. Indeed, the electric vector, especially if combined with the rest electricity production, is an option, is a fundamental option to decarbonize the economy, except for the hard-to-abate sectors, of course. And this is the reason why we should be more courageous, I think, on policies for the promotion for electrification of consumption, in particular in the residential sector and in the transport sector, for example, by encouraging a full switch to the electric mobility. Second, efforts shall continue to be dedicated to accelerating the transition by facilitating the development of RES. And this requires improving long-term price signal and simplification in permitting procedure, which is so far represented in Italy and I believe in many other countries, the main obstacles to renewables. Third, and I conclude, let me remind that the energy transition also required development of other assets functional to integrate RES, and which also requires simplification in permitting. To be more specific, I'm referring to grid and storage in particular. So leaving aside the network infrastructure, I would like to underline that the long-term price signals are also necessary for the development of storage. So in this respect, I believe capacity remuneration mechanism or other form of long-term contract are necessary to support the development of such high capital intensive investment, in particular if we think and refer to hydropower storage. And in this respect, I believe the role of long-term price signals should be further recognized to a level, and this may occur, and this should be facilitated also by means of simplification in the state aid discipline. That's all from my side, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Virginia. All very good point, and I think aligned with what we heard before, and very good point also on the importance on the short term and medium term also of reducing consumption, and more can be done on this front, that's for sure. We've got only 9 minutes left till the break, so I think I'll leave the follow-up questions in the discussion for after the break. But in the meantime, maybe we can use these 9 minutes to give the academic team the opportunity to react to a few things that have been said. So I don't know if Niels Henrik, maybe you want to react on the short to long-term market connection, or maybe Catherine or Bert on PPAs. I don't know who wants to go first, and then maybe we can conclude with you, Michael. Yeah. Short-term, long-term market balance.
Well, thank you very much for all the comments. Praise is very welcome, but of course, it's even more interesting to have when you point out that there might be weaknesses or things that needs to be improved. So we're very grateful for that. And this work is not finished, as we already said. We're going to write a final report towards the end of the year, trying to integrate all this and also be clear on conclusions, because as was rightly pointed out by Klaus Hammes, we're a bit unclear on certain points, deliberately so, because we're still not entirely clear on how we want to conclude. For example, on the issue of long-term contracting that a number of you have brought up, clearly a very important issue. Not so clear exactly how it should be solved. So that needs more careful thinking. As we said, a number of us, we think of this crisis as I think it was a shock test or a natural experiment, stress test. Natural experiment, economists would call it, that exposes the market design to an extreme event. And it's interesting to see how well it has coped. In some sense, being a cynical economist, you might argue that the market design has worked exactly as we would expect. In particular, prices have shot up. to extreme levels, admittedly, but it has ensured that the balance remains. Of course, to a large extent, the sort of price reactions that we've seen is completely unacceptable, at least the implications for many people. So the question is, how should that problem be addressed? Is it a fault of the market design that needs, and hence the market design needs fixing? Or is it, as Michael pointed out, are we in a war economy, in exceptional circumstances, where we need to take measures that are very different to what we normally would have done? Some of the suggestions that have been brought up or put forward to try to solve the current problem, we have taken a somewhat critical view of some of those because we think they're not necessarily addressing the current crisis in a very good manner. And secondly, they might introduce inefficiencies that would be bad for the market going forward and realizing the net zero ambitions. So I think I'll stop there and leave the word to Katrin, perhaps.
Yeah. So thanks again for all the good comments and criticism. That's how we make the discussion improve and get some new ideas. I would like as well to react to your comment, Christina, particularly in terms of market stress test. I think it's also has been a stress test for the legislation, and not only whether we have the tools we need to couple in the meantime, and do we have sufficient flexibility within the rules or not. And then we are moving in more blurry areas when we need to find new legal bases, new instruments, new procedures. And that uncertainty is something that nobody like. So that's one point. And you also mentioned that we're trying new mechanisms, something that we try to point out in the reports that actually we are using old mechanisms. For example, moving back to some more regulated prices. That's something that we have moved away. So it's still possible on certain terms. Then the same thing with capacity remuneration mechanisms. That's something as well that has been introduced at national level, has been more harmonized at the EU level, and then assessed case by case. Finally consolidated in some way in legislation, and we see that coming back. So we may need to assess to which extent this needs to be part of the long term, and that will be my final point. That what we see is that some of those new ideas or old mechanisms reviewed could be part of this new toolbox. Including PPAs, including capacity mechanism, including CFD contract for difference, etc., while preserving the principles, the basics of the market that will also need to be reinforced, such as price formation, such as deeper integration of the energy market, market coupling, more cross-border interconnection, and better cross-border trade. So I think that then we're moving towards a new equilibrium around those fundamentals. So thank you all.
Yeah, I would like to say something more about the PPA. So those my comments might be a bit going beyond what we have in the report. So there's also ongoing discussions. So it's obvious that the PPA is going to lower the capital cost of investments because they reduce the risk. But if you look around, I mean, it's not easy to find empirical evidence, but there has been cases in Ontario or in the US where we have seen PPAs in combination with spot market operation. And there is some anecdotal evidence that those capacities do not really participate in the spot market. So we see that the spot market become less efficient. There's also been discussion that those PPAs ex-post were signed at too high price. So this could be that ex-post, yeah, you can learn more, but it's not clear that you always sign the lowest price. We also see that some people have suggested that there was inefficient type of technology invested, especially when it goes about demand side participation, wind and storage, that in some of those PPAs in the past, let's say a hydropower plant was contracted, but some of those alternative technologies were not take into account. And they also show that there is some crowding out of private PPAs. So once you give government insurance, so then it might be that the private financial market does not develop. So some markets like Ontario, they're moving away from those regulated contracts, and they might want to go back or to some more shorter term capacity markets. So still some hedging, but no longer those real time long-term contracts. So a lot of those drawbacks, they can be addressed by changing maybe the contract design. So if you want to have an auction, then maybe the prices will be reflecting the true value. If you have a financial settlement of the contracts, firms are more likely to participate in the spot market. So you want more contract for difference approach. You could also think about technology neutrality for the contracts, because then you get more competition between different technologies. And then maybe you have to think about portfolios, let's say a wind farm and a storage that might participate together in those kind of contracts. And then together with this financial settlement, maybe it's also then good that the quantities are fixed in the contract. So it's sort of a deemed production level that's kind of the basis of those contracts, and not the actual production level, so that also the incentives for being available, that those remain intact. Yeah, but the problem is once you start to go to those designs that reduce sort of those negative drawbacks, it also makes it less interesting for investors to use those contracts for hedging reasons, because it becomes always less good hedge for them. If it's like technology neutral, there might be some risk that remains because that technology is not completely reflected in the contract. And it's true that there's no real economist yet among economists. So we see in the past that the market has worked. So we have had a dash for gas. We also see a development of corporate PPAs in the Nordic countries and also in the US. And if we look outside the electricity sector, we see that also oil and gas investments, they have been made without long-term guarantees from the government. But yeah, it's difficult to find good empirical evidence, and we think that it should probably be left also to political preferences in the member states, what kind of policy regulation they want to put in place. And then maybe the last point is that I think we should see more impact assessments by the EU. So especially also for the short-term measures, because a lot of the cost and benefits depends on the assumptions you make about elasticities. Let's say how much will supply adjust, how much will consumption adjust. And I think both for the short run and long run proposals, we would like to see more worked out impact assessments.
Thank you, Bert. Maybe Michael, you want to conclude us here in 2 minutes?
Thanks very much for all of those comments. Let me just respond, I think, to a couple that haven't been picked up on, both in terms of what we say in the report and also what we say in other reports, other SARE reports. Let me return to Andrea's point about, Andrea made a lovely point about, no market design is technology neutral. And of course, I agree with that. But on the other hand, I also think that we need to think about what the market's going to look like in the longer term as we head to net zero. So we wrote a really long and extremely good, I say so myself, with lots of stakeholder input report last year on sector coupling. And that made it clear that all the modeling around sector coupling suggests there'll be much more integration of electricity markets across Europe. There'll be more electricity, more electrification, more trade of electricity. We model that trade would go up by a factor of 3 if you simply converted the existing electricity system to a net zero one with existing demand. So, the idea that the short run market is going to be less important in the future, which was a question that Inga Kristen also brought up, it's not if we move to net zero. And that immediately suggests, did we dismantle the short run market at our peril? If we really want to get to net zero is wholly dependent on an integrated European energy system where we share renewables across Europe, and we have to have efficient short-run signals about how to dispatch the system in the face of intermittent renewables. So, so I think the answer is, the short-run markets, if anything, will get more important in the future. And of course, the other thing that I'd say in response to, is the spot market important, is that, we used to say, oh, there's a missing money problem. We did another SARE report in 2018 about market design for 2025 in the European electricity market. And I'm very proud to say that we had a scenario which was consistent with what's actually happened, which is we said there is a scenario where fossil fuel prices are high enough, combined with high enough carbon prices, whereby renewables will be rolled out anyway at the sorts of levels that we might need. And that is the scenario we are more than in at the moment. So we used to worry about the market design not delivering because the price was going to be too low. Now we've got the situation where the price is too high. Now, the other thing that we point out in the report is that we've got prices now which are higher than net zero requires. So yes, prices needed to be higher than in 2019, but they don't need to be as high as now to facilitate a rollout of low carbon generation. So, I think in terms of we need to think that in the future, the sort of electricity market we will need is one that is wholly integrated into hydrogen, that's wholly integrated into transport. And Alan will smile when, one of the things that, I really learned in our discussions was, sector coupling is something which we thought was really desirable a few years ago. We thought it was desirable that gas and electricity prices were linked, and we've discovered that linkage isn't such a great thing now. But all the modeling of net zero suggests there'll be even tighter linking between power prices, gas prices, hydrogen, and that hydrogen could come from electrolysis or it could come from cracking of methane, and prices for transport fuel. So, in some sense, we are seeing, some lessons for what the net zero economy will look like, and the importance of wide area trading, the importance of flexible markets, the importance of efficiency of investments, and the importance of being ready for big fluctuations in commodity prices, which will operate across power, heating, and transport. But thank you all for some great comments there.
Thank you very much, Michael, and thank you very much all. I think we're going to break here for 15 minutes and we'll be back for the rest of the discussion. Again, focusing this time on the long-term issues, on a couple of long-term issues, long-term price signals, long-term contracts, etc. And we'll obviously welcome inputs, questions, or comments from anyone in the room or online. So anybody welcome to join. So we'll just resume in 15 minutes, just say at 3:50. Thank you. All right, shall we resume? I think we still have a few people out of the room, but all right, we've got about 50 minutes. Can everybody, sorry, the room is a bit noisy. We're almost all back. People can hear us online also?
Yes.
Yeah.
We can hear you.
All right, thank you, Andrea. I don't see any online questions from online yet. I don't know if anyone in the room had follow-up questions to what's been discussed during the first session. I'll give you a bit of time to think about it, maybe. And in the meantime, I think, one point that given what the emphasis that many people have put on the importance of long-term signals, PPAs, CFDs, long-term contracts in general. But I think there's different views on that, the role they should play, and the instruments that should be used to put them in place. I think it'd be interesting to have a discussion on that, because that can also feed into our reflection for the final report in a couple of months from now. So maybe I'll let our academics maybe ask a couple of additional questions, and it'd be great if people in the room, so panelists, but also people in the audience, who maybe react and comment on what they think, how long-term price signals should be dealt with, basically. What's your vision on that? So maybe I'll start with I'll give the floor back to Catherine for a tiny bit, and then Bert, and then back to the audience. I don't know if a couple of follow-up questions. I think Catherine had one, and Bert, if you've got maybe one, and then just to prompt the discussion on that.
Well, thank you, Alberic, for the opportunity to exchange roles and to ask questions. I would like to follow up some of the comments that have been said, and notably since we are talking about long-term price signals and stability. The way I would like to hear about the manner you perceive the coexistence in terms of PPAs between the corporate renewable PPA, for example, and the government-backed PPAs that could possibly compete between each other. And that's something that will be interesting to hear about. The other things is, and you mentioned, Klaus, the role of regulators, rightly. And we already have seen that we have some issues in terms of capacity at level of regulators, at level of all levels, companies as well. And would like to take an example that we had as well, the CACAM reform and revision that is now put on hold. That's an example of that. So we already slowing down on the reform that should speed up the internal energy market and more integration. So there is a risk here of competing agenda that could delay any further when we are at the same time agreeing for speeding up the transition. So that was 2 questions from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Bert. Do you want to follow up directly, maybe with a couple, and then we'll give it to the audience?
Yeah. So my questions is maybe more a thought question, is like, what kind of risk do we expect shareholders to take, and what kind of risk do we expect the government to take up? And for instance, the technology choice, is that something we want to leave to the market, or is it something that the government should decide? Or the risk for being available or running over time with your investment, is that something that a company should take up, or is that something that the government should be taking. So I would like to hear your views on that.
Yes, Alain from EDF, please.
Yeah, okay. Just perhaps on your question, Bert, I think there are two facts on which we have to be very careful about what you've just mentioned. Third thing is that if you look, at the short-term prices that has been in place for 2008 till the crisis we have now, those prices have been always too low compared to the investment cost, which means that the short-term price signals has not been a signal that encouraging investment by private actors. It's only since we have the gas crisis that the revenue coming from the market is quite higher compared to the investment cost. And the level of price we have now is not desirable in the long run, of course. First point. Second point, if we look at in which condition investment have been done in the different European countries since deregulation, I would say end of the 90s, state and state and state. Most nearly everywhere, and of course there is a part of merchant investment, I will not negate it, but everywhere we see that states are choosing the technologies, are organizing the call for tenders, so they are organizing the market. For me, in our view, we don't see, for us, a generation market would be a situation in which market actors fully decide of their technology, fully decide where to inside it, to install it, and invest in it with private funds and take the risk directly on the market. Frankly speaking, it's something we say in French, un mouton à 5 pattes, a sheep with 5 feet. Taking example, my country, one of the only investments, so of course all renewables are done by the state. The only investment we had out of renewables and of course nuclear has been a call for tender for CCGTs in Brittany, which is there for security reasons. So that's facts. I don't say this is something we just see that. So we think that any future reform of the electricity market design should take into account the fact that for 30 years now, nearly 30 years, states are the central place for governing and organizing the electricity generation mix of different countries. Are they going to change? I am very big doubts, especially in the situation where we have today, where they are encouraged to intervene quite more in the markets. And I'm already big doubts, given the fact that we have huge investments to have to do for the energy transition for the next 30 years, where we have to double or triple the rate of investment in renewables. And if I take the example of my country, but it's also the case, for a country like Poland, like Finland, for nuclear, they are very present. I speak here for generation. I don't want to speak for demand, but maybe I can speak also for demand response. Because in the French, I don't know the term in English, for our 10 plans, something like our 10-year plan, there is also a decision by the states that we should have a certain percentage of demand response. So where is the market? For long term, I don't know.
Thank you, Alain. I think you make a good point that PPAs are quite developed in some parts of Europe and less so in some. So it's largely due to different national regulations that are more or less supportive of them. So one question is, I think, is what should be done really at EU level? What can the Commission do? What is the responsibility of the EU? How much can be done at that level? How much should be left to as the academic said earlier, to the subsidiarity principle and to member state initiative? Andrea, I see you've got your hand up, so I'll give you the opportunity to react to that and probably to what Alain said before. And maybe I think after that it'd be good to also hear it from the Nordics if you've got if you can bring your own national perspective on this topic. Andrea?
Yes, about the risk. Every market design has some kind of risk. So if we take the current market design, we have the current mess is partially the result of the current market design because there is a too much concentration of CCGT. We did not consider the negative externalities. The market did not factor in the negative externalities to be supplied by CCGT by Russian gas. It was not taken into consideration in this market design. This market design has a risk that there is no coordination between investment in the grids and investment in the generation. If we move towards a market based on long-term price signals, we have different kind of risk because we are able to avoid technology concentration that brought some negative externalities and is the current crisis. We are able to solve the coordination between investment in the grids and investment in generation, but we have the risk that we have over or under investment. It is true, and it's something that must be taken into consideration when we design the market. And so, how can we solve that? We have to give the right incentives to the people that are the institutions that are doing the planning of the system and leave market forces to operate. When we are considering the introduction of long-term price signals, we are saying that we need the market, we need auctions, we need the minimization of the cost of investment, and we need the possibility to understand if we are under-investing or over-investing in generation. So we need incentive for the TSO, for the investor in capacity, in demand-side management, to give the price signals. We don't have to create a communist mechanism because we are going towards a long-term, a more planned system. We can use both words. We can use competitive schemes in order to introduce long-term price signals. When we are talking about what kind of long-term price signals we can introduce, we can go in two directions. We can go towards the light regulation, let's call it like that, that is to improve remit and stuff like that, capital requirement, reducing a little bit the counterparty risk. Or we can go towards a more structural approach, and I think that this is the real way to go forward, and is to push for more bilateral contracts. And you can have bilateral contract in more or less three flavors. You can have auctions, governmental auctions, you can have forward contracts, or you can have PPAs, renewable PPAs. The question is, should it be a decentralized or a centralized long-term market? So should we have just a requirement, for example, on a final customer or retailer to contract long-term, or we need a central planner that says tomorrow you invest 20 gigawatt in PV and 30 gigawatt in wind in that area and that area? I think that different countries will prefer different solutions. Maybe in some countries, the best solution is simply a decentralized requirement on retailers. In other countries, they will prefer more TSO government that decide where to invest in PV or wind. But I think that we should start to think, how can we really introduce those mechanisms? What are the risks? How can we solve the risk? We are not saying that there is no risk attached to this solution, because to each market design there is a risk attached. But maybe we could try to think together, how can we solve, what are the risks and how can we minimize them through competitive mechanisms.
Thanks a lot, Andrea, and lots of open questions here on how to introduce and implement this. Maybe Klaus, maybe you want to come in with your perspective on this type of contracts.
Oh, that's yes, it was much easier to send the question to the academic team than getting it back. But in general, I think, as we have talked about earlier, we have two types of PPAs, the governmental and the private ones. And I think the private ones are an important way to complete markets, to risk hedge. What we see from the Nordic markets, at least, most of the investment in wind power is done nowadays on market prices only. So we have no support scheme in place anymore, for example. So but on the other end, there are long-term PPAs that are also companies that produce wind power, for example, they often they receive actually a lesser price than they could have received on the market, is what I have heard. But there's no data on that one because there's business secrets on that. So anyway, I think PPAs are part of the long-term financial market in a way, giving renewable producers and other producers a way to hedge their risks and also support investments. I'm more skeptical towards governmental PPAs because we have seen so much distortions to especially renewable markets in the last 20, 30 years that I'm not really sure that further governmental intervention will really be beneficial to the market. I'm also wondering what the value added could be, at least from a Nordic perspective, when we have a relatively well-functioning system, where the problems are elsewhere, where we have limits in the transmission capacity within the country. We have environmental and other permit processes that hinder efficient investment and so on. So from that perspective, I'm doubtful if governmental PPAs would solve. They are probably an answer to a question that is not existing. I would say clearly.
Yeah, thanks. And I think you're also making the point. Yeah, there's other important points in terms of further market integration and completion of the single market that should also, have priorities. So.
Yes, I think that is very important. Anyway, all these PPAs, I'm not really sure at what levels the regulation should be, but in one way, the regulation should be in a way that it doesn't affect other countries negatively, or the internal electricity market. So you might want to further new power production, but it's very often the case that there are other problems in the markets. You see in Germany, you have problems with nuclear power, and you reactivate nuclear a little bit, and you reactivate lignite. In other countries, you do that to other things where you can invest in the end in what would be needed. There's a political problem. That's not really a market problem again, where you can invest and how you could develop your power market.
Yeah, very good point. Thank you. Inga Kristin, maybe you want to come in. It'd be great to hear it from a Norwegian corporate perspective.
Oops. Yes, I very much agree that in the Nordic, Norway, Sweden, we don't need the onshore wind power does not need subsidies anymore. They should, and the past years, they have de-risked themselves by corporate PPAs. So the problem in Norway, at least, is that they are not getting any permits. The government, it's so much local resistance that we have completely stopped building more onshore wind. That's the main problem in Norway. And we will enter into a power deficit. I think that could also happen in other places in Europe because it's the pace of building new renewables is so slow, but the phase out of fossil and nuclear and whatever is fast, and the electrification is also speeding up, and with hydrogen and everything. So that's the main problem, that we need a more robust power supply balance. We need more power capacity, and how to get that in Norway. If they had permits, it would be built onshore wind. Of course, with offshore wind, maybe they would need some kind of subsidies or public support, depending on how much of the grid system then the developer need to cover. And then it's back to what kind of public support system should we develop that do not distort the corporate PPA market. Because we want the developers to enter into corporate PPA with us, but we cannot pay above market price kind of, or we have a limit. We have a limit that's more a global competitive level. So if a corporate PPA should combine with any kind of support system, that's, I don't know, but that's something we need to investigate further. I think that's very interesting thing to discuss. And also, but from my perspective, it's nothing wrong with the market design. I think it works very well, actually, and it's developments going on, which is fine, which closer to the physical realities and things like that. I support what Acer concluded, maybe more coupling of financial forward markets could be discussed, but from my perspective, we are on bilateral contracts more or less completely, so not that much in the market. But a well-functioning spot market is really important for us, and balancing markets and all those things. And they could also look into cross-border PPAs. It's also very interesting if you could have a broader market, also cross-border, but there's a lot of risks in there, and the risk is also in Norway because we have so many bidding zones, and the area price differences is getting very, very high and very, very uncertain, which is a real constraint to cross-border PPA. So to kind of think how can we de-risk the area price differences and more allow for cross-border PPAs would be good as well.
Thank you. And I think cross-border projects in general are facing quite a bit of administrative and market design, maybe related challenge in the future. So there's probably some point to dig a little bit deeper. Andrea, I see you wanted to react. You've got your hand up.
So just one clarification that I think that when we are talking about long-term contracts, we are not talking about state aid. So that I think, so when we are talking about PPA, the introduction of RES auctions, actually it's wrong to consider that as a state aid. For a long time, it's been considered as a state aid. But for example, if I say, okay, let's put an obligation on all the retailer to have, I don't know, 50% of their renewable generation contracted long-term, 10 years. Is it really a state aid, or it's a matter of the market design? Until now, given that it was technology specific, specifically to renewable, has been considered as a state aid measure. But in the future, it should be considered as a market design principle.
Thanks a lot for the clarification, Andrea. I think we've got a question in the room. If you can just maybe state your name and organization. Thank you.
So my name is Laetitia Perat. I am a PhD candidate in economics. And particularly, I work in demand-side flexibility in electricity markets. And so in this debate, I see that we focus a lot on capacity investments and whether they are sufficient. And the answer seems to be that no. And I was wondering if with the current market design, and the current prices we are seeing, if this is actually the opportunity, or inversely, is it a barrier for demand response? So firms, industrial firms, for example, adjusting their production to follow the prices. We can also think changing their consumption across the day, reducing the peak, and so reducing the need for to invest in peak capacity. So do you think currently that we are more in a time where it's an opportunity or a barrier? And this is a question for the academics and also for you. Thank you.
Inga, Christine, maybe you wanna, as an industrial consumer,
I
make
can
it
say
back.
something. I think it differs from country to country. So I'm not an expert on national markets, but at least in Norway and the Nordics, we have a quite well-functioning balancing market. So for we are an aluminium producer and we participate in the balancing market. So we are able to reduce our consumption and move to other times of the day. And we participate in these markets. We bid in our flexibility in the markets. So that's fine, but we have our technological limits. So we can, for example, we can switch off that fast. We can be out for 1, maximum 2 hours, and then we need to get in again. So that's our technological limits. Others have other industrial technologies have other limits. But I think we have a mix of market mechanisms in the Nordic so that the TSO gets the reserves they need quite efficiently, I think. And also in Norway, also end consumers are getting these smart meters, so they can also start to kind of participate or contribute to flexibility in the Nordics. But yeah, that needs to be developed further. Yeah, so that was at least one thing.
Thank you, Christine. Christina.
Regarding the last question, balancing plays a critical role enabling the participation of new technologies in the market, like demand response and storage. But as mentioned before from another participant also, it's that not all member states are mature enough to have the respective infrastructure or tools or even incentives. And there are some cases where are less supported, let's say, in terms of regulation. So as we understand that, for example, demand response is going to should be upgraded and should be contributing, shifting the energy market to steering, let's say, the energy market to the right direction. It is important that we acknowledge that we are not all at the same starting point, and we have, in terms of infrastructure, like smart meters and other kind of infrastructure, and also tools like time of use. But certainly, this is something that we should be visioning, let's say, in the future energy market. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Sorry, Klaus, I think you wanted to intervene on this.
Yes, just a short comment. I think demand response, all types of flexibility are extremely important to secure the transition. Yeah? So I think, as we can see also in Sweden, the demand for flexibility or from consumers has increased with the crisis. When people start to reduce their energy consumption, that suddenly they realize or enlighten, oh, your contract doesn't allow you to do that because you have a 30 days rolling contract or whatever. But so the demand for hourly payments, so to say, or hourly contracts seems to increase actually. So that's as far as I can see, not only among my colleagues, but all those people that actually use heat pumps and so on, and have a small house somewhere. Many of those people actually have hourly contracts, trying to adapt heat production at home to the electricity prices. So I think even with those prices that we see now, it's quite a no-brainer, I think. So, and the other thing is with your comment on the technology, the EU emergency intervention in some way, so things require some kind of demand response, because you want to shave off 5% of the peak load. It's not exactly known how that should be done, and not all countries have measures in place. But some way that also that article should further demand response in Europe, also in those countries that haven't done it so far. So just short.
Thank you very much, Klaus. Does anybody from the academic team want to come back on this, respond on this topic of demand response? Niels Henrik, maybe?
So I think it's good that you're doing a PhD on this issue, because as you can hear, this is a problem that hasn't really been resolved so far. And there are a number of reasons for this. One is, of course, that consumers, be they households or industrial consumers, get the right price signals. In some places they do, in other places they don't. But there also seems to be a lot of what economists would call transaction costs involved. I mean, you need the right gear, the right equipment. There's the smart meters. You needs to have installed some sort of system that ensures that you can benefit from this. Because I think right now, some Norwegians are waking up at night and turning on their washing machine and things like that. But that's not really what you want to do. You want to do this automatically. But there is certainly, this crisis seems to have increased the interest in being flexible. So, but there are a number of issues that explain why so far there's relatively little demand response.
Thank you. Maybe Michael, you want to respond to some of the comments that have been made? I think you've got to leave us in 5 minutes, so I'd like to give you the opportunity to reply to some of the comments and questions before you leave.
Yeah, thanks, Albert. And there are lots of good comments there. I think just to, make 2 or 3 comments as an economist, as an energy economist, just to sort of throw into the mix. I think there are many markets where, this is to Alan's point, there are many markets where long-term investment is dominated by governments, and there are short-run prices. And that doesn't mean that the government ignores what the short-run prices are saying. I think the idea that the government would sign a long-term PPA ignoring what the prices in the short-run markets or the forward price of the next 5 years are, that doesn't happen. Certainly doesn't happen in my country. So I think we shouldn't exaggerate the disconnect between long and short-run markets, and the fact that governments are all over a long-term market and the private sector is all over a short-run market, and lots of it. And while I completely agree with you that historically most investment in the electricity sector has gone on with sort of state-backed investments, we have had a lot of CCGTs added commercially across Europe. We have had recently, we've seen lots of storage being added across Europe commercially. And of course, in the future, we would expect, lots of hydrogen investments, lots of transport investments to be added by the private sector, and that to be intimately related to power costs. So that's one thing. The other thing as an economist is just sparked by something Andrea said. One of the things that economists have always said is there's been distortion between energy vectors. Okay, gasoline is very heavily taxed in Europe. Electricity is, pretty, some taxation of electricity, and that a lot of decarbonization costs are put on electricity, and gas has been massively undertaxed, particularly direct consumption of gas. hasn't been subject to taxation, and I suspect in the longer run we're going to regret not having properly taxed gas. Okay, and massive, the reason why German industry was massively over consuming gas relative to other vectors was because of a straight tax distortion. So there's sort of interesting lessons, aren't there, for taxes. And I think on the last question, on the demand response, important to say there has been quite big industrial demand response. Heavy industry does respond to high energy prices. In the report we mention, there's, it's very crude. The price of electricity for manufacturing is up about 44% in the UK between 2019 and 2022, and demand is down 6%. Okay, which is quite big, so that's elasticity of 0.14. I mean, so demand has gone down in response to very high rises in realized prices that industry is paying. The problem is that, as Niels Hendrik was pointing out, that there are plenty of sectors where there's very little demand response because of widespread market failures. So in households, people who make the decisions aren't the people who pay the bill. People don't have control over particular devices. Similarly, in lots of commercial settings, electricity is a really small percentage of cost. It's difficult to control. And there, in order to get deep demand response, you need behavioral solutions. You need deliberate policy interventions which are aimed at increasing the elasticity of demand. And of course and if you don't have those, as we're seeing in Europe in the moment, it's the industry that can respond that faces higher price rises in order to generate, more drastic reductions in its demand in response to the price. And we sort of owe it to European industry to improve the response among the relatively inelastic parts of the economy, which are very big in Europe. Household demand and commercial demand for electricity, that's most of electrical demand. And if that's got very poor response to prices, it's industry that then has to disproportionately respond to price rises and to scarcity. So, governments really ought to have been doing more about that. And we've made that point in the report, that really should have been a priority over the winter. And as I think Klaus was pointing out, that the Commission has introduced this target, but it hasn't in any way suggested how it's going to be achieved. For instance, it could have suggested that all regulated tariffs have to have a market price element to them at the margin, and in order to incentivize more response, or that deep demand intervention should be required, like every country in Europe has to run a advertising campaign aimed at reducing demand for energy over the winter. And again, we've seen countries reluctant to do that for unclear political reasons. But thank you for all those comments.
Thanks a lot, Michael. And I think it's the right time to say goodbye to you, I think, because you have to leave us. But thanks a lot for joining us online today. And we hope to have you in person next time. And talk to you soon. So we're one man and one woman down now. So we've got half of the academic team left with us to ask and answer questions. So I don't know if anybody else in the audience still has. Yes, Jules from Schneider Electric, I think, right?
Yeah, thank you very much, Alberic. And actually, thanks for pointing out, the question of demand response and demand side flexibility, which is tackled, in the report. But I think to some extent there are elements which might have been addressed also to the question of how we facilitate the access of demand side flexibility to the capacity mechanism, because demand response is a fraction of demand side flexibility, but there are obviously big issues in how the market design directive and regulations are being implemented across Europe. And the fact that, for instance, the access to such markets, such as capacity mechanism, is not enough granted, for a lot of customers and aggregators who want to engage in demand-side flexibilities. And one of the ideas on the table, which has been put forward by SmartN, for instance, is to reduce the minimum bid size, which are usually too long for the customers and the aggregators to have the return on investments. And to the point of the market signals that you mentioned, indeed, that's one of the strong barriers to further incentivize demand response. And what we believe as Schneider is that one of the issue obviously right now is that the network tariff, which are applied to customers, are usually obviously fixed to recover the past investments and do not enough reflect the potential of demand-side flexibility and energy efficiency as a design. That's one of the main barriers. So it would be great to get your thought on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jules. Who wants to take this one? Bert?
Yeah, it's not really the topic of the paper, and maybe also I'm also not expert in capacity market. So, I mean, it seems logical that reducing the bid size so that consumers can participate. I mean, I think that seems like a good measure on the first side. So, I guess capacity mechanism, once you design them as a financial contract, then in theory, I mean, like a reliability option, then in theory, all players can benefit or participate on those contracts. So I think that should work. I mean, the question is only, let's say, if the government buys this reliability option on behalf of consumers, then you already benefit from those contracts. So it would be a bit weird to benefit twice on those contracts, but and network tariffs, yeah, I mean, I think it's important that the network tariffs set the right incentives. And especially, let's say, wholesale versus behind the meter, or let's say on the wholesale side or behind the meter, that you don't distort where you're going to provide flexibility of storage. I think that's an important thing. But yeah, there's, I think, still more research to be done, because you could, once you start introducing, let's say, nodal pricing or local congestion pricing, you might have a different way of going forwards. And it depends also a bit like how costly would it be to implement those kind of changes. So yeah, and yeah, I think there should be more research be done on this topic.
Thank you very much, Bert. I see that. Andrea, you've got your hand up again. Want to react to that?
On demand response, and in particular implicit demand response, has been a little bit of a failure of the classical economic model applied to our market design currently. Because, for example, in Spain, the residential customers that are in the regulated tariff has the perfect implicit demand response tariff, because there's a tariff that change every hour, considering the change in the market prices. But we didn't see a big change in their consumption. We have seen now a change, but it has not been so strong. So this can be the result of or a very, very inelastic demand curve, or maybe there is some market failure that we should take into consideration inside our market design. And one possibility is moving from, instead of an implicit demand response that has always been the center of the European Commission response, towards more a demand response that is more explicit. And so having prices that are fixed, but I'm giving a premium if you are able to switch off your appliances. So moving maybe from a demand response that is implicit towards a demand response that is explicit, maybe could have some positive response from a behavioral point of view. In addition, I think that the crisis also puts under the light the need for energy efficiency. That is always the Cinderella of our discussion, and unfortunately, not many people are doing energy efficiency at the house, introducing new appliances able to have the same to have the same use, but with a lower consumption. And so also this could be taken into consideration inside the new market design to allow this new product to emerge and to deliver these energy savings and price savings for all the system at the end of the day.
Thanks a lot. I think, and I think you make a good point. It's something that I think is pointed out in the report, which is, EU legislation has made room for a bunch of new actors, new types of flexibility, energy efficiency, et cetera, but, services and actors that have not fully taken their place in the current energy system in Europe. And there's probably, the room, and we should be pushing this more in the near future. And, either whether we're talking about, for instance, short or long-term energy efficiency. We've got
Alberic?
a bit more than 5 minutes yet so Alain, do you want to come in on that?
Yes, I wanted to make a comment on demand response because I don't want to be as first, I would like to clear now you have different notions: demand reduction, demand destruction, energy efficiency, demand side flexibility. So I would like to know what we talk about. I understand that we talk to the answer of price of demand to prices. So I have heard, some very negative thing on domestic customers. In EDF, we don't believe that at all. For 40 years, we have every night at 10 o'clock an increase of demand of 3 gigawatt, which is a result of a supply contract which is used by half of the domestic customers. So massive demand response for domestic customer works. And we intend this summer to double the numbers of customers we have on critical peak pricing, which is supply offer we have been which is publicly you can find on a website, and we are going to launch a campaign to 5 million of customers that we think they are able to answer to this critical peak pricing. So it works for domestic customers. It works implicitly. So just you want to do it, and so having seen that, I think that out of demand response, which is a very important subject, we have to discuss this. I think, in the future market we are designing, we have to have an input of 2 elements that were not present in the 90s when we designed the market design. The market design we made in the 90s were mainly based for competition between numbers of generation mix that was abundant. Now we have 2 challenges to face. The first one is the security of supply, and is security of supply should supply be led to market? I often heard no, and I could hear it in the voice of the Commission today. So it means that there is if it's not led to the market, it's led to somebody else. And again, I don't see anybody else but the state for that. And the second point is then we need an energy market for the energy transition, which is also a different target than the one we have had in the 90s. These 2 elements, should be, I think, taken into account in the reform we are thinking about. And of course, we can speak, we have to think, of which type of long-term contract we may have. In our minds, long-term contracts are not only state-based, and to be very clear, there is a large place for PPAs between private actors. But all of that, must be in the framework that we need to develop. We need to electrify Europe, we need to decarbonize Europe by electricity, and we need to be sure that we have a sufficient security of supply.
Thanks a lot, Alain, very clear. We've got only 3 minutes left, so does anybody else have a last question or comment that they would like to make? If not, I'll just give it back to our academic team very, very quickly to maybe wrap up, and I'll quickly conclude. Henrik, then Bert, yeah?
Well, let me just take the opportunity again to thank you all. It's been a real pleasure to participate in this project. We've had a lot of challenging questions, a lot of interesting input from stakeholders. Clearly, as your comments today and the discussion here has shown, we are still lacking answers to some of the important questions. We will try to provide some further answers when we write the 3rd report. But these are challenging days, interesting, especially for academics. So again, thank you very much.
Yeah, I just don't really want to add much. So I think it's interesting to hear all the discussions. I don't think that we'll work towards more answers, but I don't think we will come up with a single answer. I mean, I think that the different member states have quite different views. And I think we might, we have still to discuss it, but we might come up with some menu of different options depending on the preferences of different member states. But let's see how we continue in the future.
Yeah, thanks a lot, both. I think I'm just going to echo that the most difficult, I think, is ahead of us in writing just a few pages of final recommendations that, find the right balance between all of the different things that we've heard today and that we, hear every day. But that was a very useful discussion, I think, for all of us. So as previously announced, so we'll, I think, reconvene here in 2 months to present the final leg of this report. And there will be, more work. Market design related work coming out of SER in the next few months. Also, we've got a project specifically on offshore wind, and then we've got a bunch of other initiatives. So thanks very much to everyone for joining us online. Thanks to our academic team, obviously, but our panelists. The audience, and our next SER Energy event will be on energy data sharing, and that will be next week. So again, thank you, and speak to you all soon. Bye. Ciao, Andrea.
Ciao.
Ciao, Verdiana.
Thank you. Goodbye.
See you, everyone. Thank you.